What if I told you that stupidity isn't merely the lack of intelligence, but something much more dangerous? A force capable of turning brilliant minds into tools of devastation. What if the true danger to civilization doesn't come from evil people committing evil acts, but from everyday individuals who've just stopped thinking? Picture this. A highly respected scientist with multiple degrees suddenly begins spreading dangerous misinformation. A kind-hearted teacher starts supporting harmful ideologies. A devoted parent begins making choices that put their own children at risk. These aren't villains. They're smart, well-intentioned people who've succumbed to what Dietrich Bonhoeffer described as the power of stupidity. And here's what makes this truly terrifying. It's not happening to other people, it's happening to people just like you and me. This isn't just philosophical speculation. In 1961, Stanley Milgram conducted his infamous obedience experiments at Yale University. Ordinary volunteers were instructed by an authority figure to administer what they believed were increasingly painful electric shocks to another person. Despite hearing screams of agony, 65% of participants delivered shocks they thought could be lethal. These weren't sadists or mentally ill. They were normal people who had temporarily surrendered their capacity for independent moral judgment. This is precisely what Bonhoeffer saw with his own eyes in Nazi Germany. And it pushed him to formulate one of the most disturbing ideas about human nature ever proposed. But before we go any further, I want to ask you this. Have you ever caught yourself believing something just because everyone else around you did too? Hold on to that thought as we dig into what could be one of the most crucial psychological insights of the modern age. Dietrich Bonhoeffer wasn't some detached philosopher secluded in an ivory tower mulling over abstract theories. He was a German Lutheran pastor who witnessed his entire society undergo a disturbing transformation. Born in 1906 into a well-educated family. His father, a respected psychiatrist and neurologist. Bonhoeffer had every reason to trust in education and the power of reasoned dialogue. But as the Nazi Party gained power, he observed something that completely shattered his confidence in human rationality. He watched as his fellow Germans, people who were educated, refined, and devout, began backing leaders and policies that stood in stark opposition to their professed values. These weren't uninformed masses being duped by slick propaganda. They were scholars, physicians, clergy, and thinkers who were consciously taking part in their own intellectual capitulation. In 1943, from a prison cell where he awaited execution for his involvement in a plot to assassinate Hitler, Bonhoeffer penned what would become his most haunting insight. Against stupidity, we are defenseless. Neither protest nor force can achieve anything here. Arguments fall on deaf ears. What made this reflection so unsettling wasn't just the setting in which it was written, but its unsettling accuracy. Evil, he pointed out, always contains the seed of its own undoing. It stirs discomfort, opposition, and eventually collapse. But stupidity, it moves forward under the belief that it's doing what's right, making it completely resistant to correction. Perhaps Bonhoeffer's most prescient insight was about how stupidity serves existing power structures. Malicious people know they're doing wrong, which creates internal conflict and eventual breakdown. But people caught in functional stupidity believe they're doing good, making them absolutely resistant to correction. This isn't accidental. Those in power don't need to actively suppress information anymore. They just need to create conditions where processing information honestly becomes prohibitively difficult. When Bonhoeffer spoke of stupidity, he wasn't referring to a low IQ or a lack of formal education. He was pointing to something much more nuanced, what we might now label as willful ignorance or functional stupidity. In his prison letters, he clarified, the fact that the stupid person is often stubborn shouldn't distract us from recognizing that he lacks independence. In speaking with him, you get the distinct feeling that you're not really engaging with the person themselves, but rather with catchphrases, slogans, and stock phrases that have taken hold of them. What made Bonhoeffer's theory truly groundbreaking was this. He believed that stupidity doesn't primarily stem from personal shortcomings, but from larger systemic forces that make independent thinking both hard and costly. The reality is, our economic structures actually reward intellectual shortcuts. Social media companies rake in billions by encouraging emotional reactions over critical thought. News organizations drive more traffic with outrage than with nuance. And politicians often secure victories not through detailed policy, but through catchy, oversimplified slogans. When people are working multiple jobs, drowning in debt, and constantly bombarded with information, intellectual surrender becomes a survival strategy. What economists call rational ignorance emerges. It becomes more efficient for individuals to remain uninformed about complex issues than to invest the time and energy required for genuine understanding, but this individual rationality creates collective irrationality. Exactly the dynamic Bonhoeffer observed in Nazi Germany. The result isn't just individual choice, it's structural pressure toward intellectual surrender. And our brains, stressed and overwhelmed, are perfectly designed to comply. While our economic systems nudge us toward mental shortcuts, our brains are already naturally inclined to follow. In the 1950s, Leon Festinger's pioneering work on cognitive dissonance revealed exactly how this plays out psychologically. When people are confronted with information that challenges their existing beliefs, the mind instinctively resists. It tries to dismiss or distort that information. But here's what Bonhoeffer grasped long before modern psychology confirmed it. This resistance intensifies under stress, overwhelm, or financial insecurity. The very conditions our current systems tend to produce. Bonhoeffer also noticed that stupidity doesn't just show up in individuals. It tends to flourish in groups. Writing, it becomes clear that stupidity is not a psychological problem, but a sociological one. He noticed that perfectly rational individuals would abandon their critical thinking abilities when they became part of a larger group or movement. This insight was decades ahead of its time. Solomon Asch's conformity experiments in the 1950s demonstrated exactly what Bonhoeffer had witnessed. When surrounded by a group giving obviously wrong answers, 75% of people will go along with the crowd at least once, even when they know the group is wrong. Now imagine how this plays out in our digital age. Social media algorithms create echo chambers that make this transformation easier than ever. A 2018 study by MIT researchers found that false information spreads 6 times faster than true information on social platforms. But here's the crucial insight. It's because false information often feels more emotionally satisfying than complex truths. When someone shares misinformation that confirms their worldview, they're participating in a system that rewards intellectual shortcuts over careful analysis. The algorithm feeds them more of the same, creating echo chambers that act like intellectual quicksand. Have you ever wondered why your social media feed always seems to reflect exactly what you already think or want to see? That's no coincidence. It's a design feature of what could be called chosen ignorance. And this isn't just a modern phenomenon. History shows the same pattern again and again. The Salem witch trials weren't led by evil villains, but by devout, well-meaning members of the community who truly believed they were doing the right thing. The Red Scare of the 1950s wasn't fueled by bad intentions, but by patriotic Americans convinced they were protecting democracy. Time after time, smart, educated individuals have traded critical thought for emotional reassurance and the comfort of group consensus. If both our brains and the systems around us are working against us, how do we resist? Bonhoeffer believed the answer lies in what he called costly grace. The courage to think for yourself, even when it's uncomfortable, unpopular, or even risky. But today, we know the challenge runs even deeper. We're not just pushing back against social pressure. We're up against millions of years of evolutionary wiring and billion-dollar algorithms engineered to exploit our cognitive shortcuts. At the individual level, we can develop what psychologists refer to as intellectual humility. The awareness that our understanding is always limited and may be flawed. This involves deliberately exposing ourselves to ideas that challenge our views, not as a form of self-punishment, but as a way to evaluate whether those views truly deserve to be held. Here are a few tangible habits that can serve as your daily act of resistance against giving in to intellectual surrender. First, engage in intellectual friction. Dedicate time each week to reading well-reasoned perspectives from people who disagree with you. Not necessarily to change your mind, but to see if your beliefs can hold up under real scrutiny. Second, lean into productive ignorance. When you feel absolutely certain about something, ask yourself, what kind of evidence would make me reconsider? If nothing comes to mind, that's a warning sign. Third, slow down before sharing. Before posting anything online, take 60 seconds to verify it with an independent, credible source. That short pause can disrupt the algorithmic loop that thrives on emotional knee-jerk reactions. And finally, make it a habit to say, I don't know, when you truly don't. In a culture that often prizes confident misinformation over quiet honesty, admitting uncertainty becomes a small but powerful act of defiance. But personal habits alone won't cut it. We also need systemic changes that make intellectual honesty not just possible, but easier and more rewarding. That means holding social media companies accountable, requiring them to be transparent about how their algorithms shape what we see. It means investing in robust public media literacy initiatives that teach people how to critically assess sources and evidence. It means rethinking how digital platforms operate, designing them to promote intellectual humility rather than tribal certainty. And above all, we need economic policies that ease the daily stress and instability that push people toward cognitive shortcuts. When people aren't living in constant fear about healthcare, housing, or job security, they gain the mental space to engage more deeply with complex, nuanced issues. Bonhoeffer's theory was brilliant for its time, but here's what he couldn't have known. This isn't just about moral surrender or social pressure. Modern neuroscience reveals something far more unsettling. Our brains are literally wired to fall into functional stupidity. Think about it. Bonhoeffer witnessed Nazi propaganda spreading through newspapers and radio broadcasts. But we're living through something exponentially more dangerous. We've gone from Nazi propaganda to social media algorithms that know exactly which psychological buttons to push. And now we're entering the age of AI deepfakes that can fabricate reality itself. The danger isn't just growing. It's aimed directly at the foundation of how human cognition works. This isn't merely about Nazis or historical propaganda. It's about how your brain is wired. Our minds evolved to value speed over precision, to instinctively trust the familiar, and to seek out information that reinforces what we already believe. These traits once helped our ancestors survive, when pausing to reflect could mean getting killed. But today, they leave us exposed. And the most unsettling part? No one is immune, no matter how intelligent they think they are. The very process Bonhoeffer warned about is at play. When people are anxious or uncertain, they become more prone to latch on to confident, authoritative narratives that oversimplify complex realities. But here's the insight that makes Bonhoeffer's warning more urgent today than ever before. We're no longer just up against human manipulation. We're facing systems powered by artificial intelligence, built specifically to exploit our cognitive weaknesses with chilling precision. Every scroll, every click, every moment of emotional engagement is tracked, analyzed, and used to undermine our ability to think independently. We saw this unfold in real time during the COVID-19 pandemic. Highly educated professionals, doctors, engineers, lawyers, people trained in critical analysis, began spreading debunked claims about vaccines and treatments. These weren't lapses in intelligence. They were breakdowns in intellectual autonomy under immense psychological and informational pressure. Bonhoeffer paid the ultimate price for refusing to surrender his intellectual independence. He was executed by hanging on April 9, 1945, just weeks before Germany's surrender. His last words, according to a fellow prisoner, were, "This is the end for me, the beginning of life." His sacrifice wasn't just about political resistance. It was about defending the very possibility of human thought. He understood that when people stop thinking independently, they stop being fully human. They become, in his words, puppets, whose strings are pulled by whatever force happens to be strongest at the moment. What makes Bonhoeffer's final challenge so piercingly relevant today is this question: who stands fast? When the urge to conform is overwhelming, when independent thought demands real courage, when truth costs more than the comfort of easy lies, who stands fast? The answer doesn't lie in superior intellect or advanced education. It lies in the everyday decision to stay curious instead of certain, to pursue truth over convenience, to choose careful thought over reflexive reaction. These aren't grand or heroic gestures. They're ordinary disciplines that become extraordinary in a world where most have given them up. The tragedy is that giving up our intellectual independence often feels like freedom. Thinking deeply is exhausting. It's uncomfortable to sit with conflicting ideas, to wrestle with complexity, to acknowledge that we might be wrong, especially about things that matter. But Bonhoeffer believed that this discomfort is the cost of staying truly human. In a world that benefits from our mental surrender, the simple act of thinking for yourself becomes an act of quiet rebellion. This brings us to perhaps the most uncomfortable truth of all. We're all susceptible to functional stupidity. The moment we think we're immune, we've already begun to succumb. The price of intellectual freedom is eternal vigilance, not against external enemies, but against our own tendency to stop thinking when thinking becomes difficult. Bonhoeffer's theory of stupidity is unsettling precisely because it's so accurate. We see it everywhere. Intelligent people believing obviously false things, educated individuals making catastrophically bad decisions, well-meaning citizens supporting policies that contradict their own values. The problem isn't that people are getting less intelligent. It's that our systems increasingly reward intellectual shortcuts over careful thinking. But within this sobering diagnosis lies real hope. If stupidity is in part a choice, then it's also something we can refuse. If it's shaped by systems, then those systems can be redesigned. If it stems from cognitive overload, we can build environments that support clarity rather than confusion. Think of critical thinking like physical fitness. It's uncomfortable at first, but essential for building strength. Just as no one expects to run a marathon without training, we shouldn't expect to process complex information without cultivating intellectual discipline. The mental muscles we need for independent thinking require consistent use, or they weaken and fade. The next time you find yourself absolutely certain about something, the next time you catch yourself dismissing contradictory evidence without consideration, the next time you feel the comfort of having all the answers, remember Bonhoeffer's warning. Functional stupidity doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It whispers that you already know everything you need to know. And in that moment of awareness, a choice presents itself. Will you trade your mind for the ease of certainty? Or will you take the harder road, the path of intellectual independence? Bonhoeffer's lasting question isn't whether we're clever enough to avoid stupidity. It's whether we're brave enough to keep thinking when it's inconvenient, unsettling, or comes at a cost. In a world that thrives on our intellectual surrender, the act of thinking clearly and independently may be one of the most vital things any of us can do. So here's my challenge to you this week. Take one belief you hold with confidence and spend 30 minutes exploring the strongest arguments against it. Not to punish yourself and not to drown in uncertainty, but to practice the kind of intellectual bravery Bonhoeffer gave his life defending. If your belief holds up under honest examination, you'll carry it with greater clarity. If it doesn't, you'll have gained something even more important, a deeper understanding of the line between conviction and truth. The future of human dignity may well hinge on how we, together, choose to respond to Bonhoeffer's challenge. If this video made you reconsider something you once felt sure about, that's not a sign of weakness. It's the first step toward real intellectual courage. Share this with someone who's willing to think deeply, even when it's uncomfortable. Because in a world built to capitalize on our mental surrender, the quiet act of thinking clearly might just be the most powerful form of resistance we have. And here's what I want you to take with you. Every time you choose curiosity instead of certainty, evidence instead of emotion, and deliberate thought instead of snap judgment, you're doing more than safeguarding your own mind. You're standing up for the very idea of human wisdom in an age dominated by artificial stupidity. So here's the question. What's one belief you're willing to examine this week? Drop it in the comments, and let's commit together to being the kind of people who keep thinking, even when everyone else has stopped.